Across the causeway, where according to Malaysia's Federal Territories Minister, Kuala Lumpur, Putrajaya and Labuan will most likely hit herd immunity as early as August. This with their vaccination rates on the up. Even then, the coordinating minister for immunization said Malaysia won't be able to fully inoculate 10% of its population by the end of the month, potentially delaying its targeted easing of the ongoing lockdown. And with that earmarked for June 28th, Malaysia is supposed to move into the second phase of a 4-phase exit plan. Unveiled last week, the plan's second phase will involve curbs being slightly relaxed while retaining social sector and travel bans. But this can only start when Malaysia's daily new cases dip below 4,000 and after 10% of the population has been fully vaccinated. The third phase will see most sectors allowed to open by default, while some curbs on social sectors remain. For this, daily cases have to drop below 2,000 and 40% of the population has to be fully inoculated. And a full reopening is projected from November, once 60% has been fully vaccinated and cases are below 500 a day. As of this past Sunday, though, only 5% of Malaysia's population have received both doses of the vaccine, and the country is still seeing over 5,000 cases daily. Under the current lockdown, some 17 industries are allowed to operate with up to 60% capacity, and it's led to a debate of sorts on the winners and losers of this lockdown. Well, the Straits Times' Malaysia Bureau Chief Shannon Teo joins me from Kuala Lumpur now. So hi Shannon, other countries, including Singapore, have gone through lockdowns, and naturally some sectors will suffer more than others. So help us understand, what exactly are the main gripes here?
You're right, Polly. Lockdowns have become a part of life for most people around the world, but it is a question of fairness. When Malaysia went into a lockdown the first time last year, and they called it the Movement Control Order, or MCO for short, only a few thousand businesses outside what was gazetted as essential could continue to operate. I think the number was about close to 3,000. But for the two MCOs that we've had this year, there have been a wide swath of exclusions. As you mentioned, for this particular lockdown, even though the government is calling it a total lockdown, 17 sectors are excluded. Now, 125,000 businesses, at least, that was the last count that we have been excluded. They have been allowed to operate, and this is aside from what is considered essential. So clearly, there are many businesses which are not considered essential that are being allowed to operate this time. And you can tell that the figures are very wide. It's about 100,000 companies difference. So those who are affected, those who are in other sectors, those who are forced to lock down, they are crying foul. They are asking, if the government is picking winners, what are the rationale for picking certain industries and not other industries? None of this is really known. Malaysians are given the list of exclusions, and we are just told to abide by them. The second factor here is that you took Singapore for an example. While there was a lockdown, there was quite a fair bit of government aid. I think for Singapore by May of last year, there was $100 billion of fiscal stimulus. Wage subsidies were up to 75%. Malaysia, in comparison, last year we spent 60 billion during the MCO, during the 6 weeks of MCO. And the wage subsidies were limited to about 1,200 ringgit or $400 per employee. Now, this time around, this year in this lockdown, the spending has been 16 billion. That's about a quarter of what was spent last year. And so many are suffering without a buffer. What they're calling out for is, you got to help us survive this lockdown.
Right. Well, you have spoken to some business leaders for an analysis piece. What are they calling for, Shannon? What do they want done from the government, considering the lockdown could be extended beyond June the 28th? Well,
as we mentioned, they want some kind of fairness, either more aid. And in fact, some are kind of framing it around the idea of compensation, because when there was a demand for an automatic loan moratorium to last until the end of the year and for it to be blanket for everyone, the finance minister said that if we did this, we would have to compensate the banks. And the Association of Banks also agreed with the finance minister. Targeted moratorium is a better solution. Now, the response is Well, why do you have to compensate the banks when you don't have to compensate the businesses that are actually forced to shut? The banks can continue to operate. So where is the compensation for us? That's what people are asking for. Of course, the government turns it as aid or stimulus or relief funds. But really what it is compensation, right? It's compensation for being forced to close. Now, this concept of compensation is not going very far right now. I mean, there is some money, there is some relief. But if you are a company which has, say, 50 employees and you're paying them a wage of, let's say, an average of 5,000 ringgit a month, that's 250,000 ringgit every month. Nobody is giving you 250,000 ringgit to cover your wage bill if you're one of those companies that are forced to close. So in lieu of compensation, because there just isn't money for it, then what some of these businesses say would be a fairer thing to do is go into a real total lockdown, something like the MCO we had last year, where there were very few companies that were allowed to operate. This will bring the case numbers down a lot faster. And as you know, we are still averaging above 5,000 now. And once the cases are low, below 500, as the government has said, then you can go and exit from this lockdown and everyone can operate, and that would be fairer. Of course, the government says that if we lock everyone down, that it would have dire effect on the economy, something like a 2.5 billion ringgit loss a day. But, what is happening now is that the losses is about 1 billion ringgit a day, and it's going on for a very long time. The argument now is is it better to have very deep losses for a short time or smaller losses for a very long time? That's clearly just the difference. But some are arguing that deep losses shared out by everyone for a short time would be fairer than just applying the losses to some sectors of the economy and not to others.
Well, Shannon, thank you so much for giving us that perspective. I've been speaking with Shannon Teo, our Malaysia Bureau Chief.